Hey everyone. Today I wanted to talk about something that might seem a little bit boring, but it's really important and it's something that you should really pay attention to from the beginning, and that's just staying organized. Being organized is something that's going to help you in meeting deadlines and knowing what your week is going to be like, and just making sure that you never lose any files you need or feel overwhelmed by the amount of work you have. I hope you watch it, even though it might not sound that interesting. And if you want some really good tips on how to make sure that your life is always under control as a freelancer, keep watching. The first thing I want to talk about is just juggling deadlines and allotting yourself enough time to meet these deadlines. I know when you first start out freelancing, it's really hard to say no to any job that comes your way because you just never know when the next one will get there. Um, and it's also really hard to tell somebody that you need more time than they want to give on a project. I know a lot of times people would come to me with a job and want it done really quickly, and I would give in and just say, "Yeah, I could do that," because I didn't want to risk them leaving and going with someone else. But honestly, it's not a bad thing to negotiate the timetable you need. If you know that you have 2 projects already that you're working on and that this project is going to take you several hours of work to do, don't be afraid to say you need another couple days or something. Some of them might give you a little pushback, um, but I found that a lot of them do have extra time to give you. A lot of times they just want this back because it's important to them. If they're giving you a piece of music that they want mixed and mastered, they want that back because they're excited to get that final project. But a lot of times they don't need it back right away. So just ask for some extra time if you need it. My other suggestion would be to just be conscious of how long each job will take you and allot yourself extra time just in case something happens. It's really hard to know how long something will take you when you're just getting started, but the more jobs you do, the more you'll learn how long you need to complete each task. If you're recording an audiobook that's 30,000 words, it's really hard to estimate when you get going how long 30,000 words is going to take to narrate and edit. But eventually you will get an idea of how long it takes. And just because something might take you 3 days of work to get done does not mean you want to offer a 3 day turnaround time for your client. It really depends on how many other jobs you have on the table, as well as just making sure you give yourself a little bit of room in case something comes up. I've had things come up where a job has taken me an extra day longer than I thought it would, or, you know, issues arise and you want to account for them. It's really easy to underpromise and overdeliver, and that's really what you're going to want to do to make sure that all your clients leave happy. And if you're not devoting enough time to these projects as you need because your deadlines are too quick, your quality is going to go down, and that's going to limit the amount of returning customers you have and the amount of future work you get. And you just never want that situation. So don't be afraid to say you need more time. The last thing I want to talk about is just prioritizing projects. It's almost an instinct to want to finish the earliest project you get before starting on the next because that just feels right. That feels respectful of the client. But sometimes that's just not possible, especially when you're just starting out. Places like Fiverr really kind of push you to have a 24-hour turnaround time just because the market is so saturated with freelancers right now. And for things like podcast mixing and other types of things like that, clients really come to expect it because they can get it. If you don't offer 24-hour turnaround time, they'll get it from someone else and just not go with you. So you really have to offer that at the beginning until you reach a higher level of quality that people expect. And then once you get there, they know that a 24-hour turnaround time shouldn't be expected if they want a good final product. So if you have more long form job that you're working on and a short form job, like recording that 30,000 word audiobook and editing a podcast, it might be in your best interest to take care of that podcast first. That might take, an hour, 2 hours of work to get done. Whereas this audiobook you're going to be working on for several days for sure, easily. Um, so if you get rid of that podcast job right now, it will be out of your mind. It'll declutter your mind. It'll keep that organized, and you won't have to worry about hitting that deadline. If you leave it until later, when you only have a few hours left on the deadline, you're going to be rushed and you're going to do a worse job. So just get that out of the way and go back to your audiobook so you can give them both the time they deserve. Next, I want to talk about some methods and apps that I use to help me stay organized. And I really urge you to look into them as well. There's a lot of options out there for all the apps. I'm going to tell you the ones that I use, but depending on your needs and what you're looking for, there's a lot that you can find that work. So the first one that I would recommend when you're starting out is some sort of timekeeping app. I really don't use this as much anymore, but at the beginning, it really helped me a lot. Audio freelancing is a little bit different than other forms of freelancing, is that we don't generally charge by work hours. A lot of other freelancing, you would bill the client for your hours worked, but for audio freelancing, you're really going by project, and it really depends what you're doing. If you're mixing a podcast and editing a podcast, you're just going to take an amount of money for that job. Doing any sort of narration has its own pricing structure. Everything has a different pricing structure, but it doesn't generally go by hours worked, for better or worse. But what I used a timekeeping app for in the beginning was just to keep an eye on how long things took me to get done. So I used an app called Toggle, spelled Toggl, and they have it everywhere, iPhone, Android, your computer. And it just allowed me to keep track of how long jobs took me so that in the future I could better estimate how long I would need for every project. So if I was doing an audiobook, I would be able to break that up into narration, editing, and mixing and see exactly how long each element took me, as long as how long this gig took me. And then in the future, if I got another 30,000 word book, I would know it's, generally going to take me this amount of time. So I would definitely look into using one of these to start out with until you know how long things take you. And then you'd probably be able to drop it unless for some reason you were working with a client that was paying you by amount of work hours. The next thing I would recommend using is some sort of to-do list. I use Apple's Reminders app, which is built in free with any device of theirs that you might buy. Before this, I also used Microsoft To Do, which was a great app as well. And I'm going to explain exactly how I use it because there's an organizational structure to it that I found helped me a lot. So when you're using a to-do list app, obviously you're going to put things in there like deadlines and things you want to get done. So what I did is have different groups for every section of my life. You might only use this for freelancing, you might not, but I do freelance jobs, I have a YouTube channel, I'm working on a website, I have a band outside of this. So I have a lot of places in my life that need organization. So start by grouping them all separately. Freelancing would have its own section. And then within that, you can create different lists that you need to work on. So one of them might be things that you need to work on organizationally, like putting a new gig up, writing a gig, getting other things going like that, researching into something that you want to read about. Another one might be the projects you have to work on. Just places that you can break down your to-do list in any way that you can will help. And then the next thing I do with that is put them into daily to-do lists. So I made a different list for every day of the week. And then on Monday mornings, when I start working again, I go through my week and see what I need to do. And now that I have a good idea of how long each project takes me, I know roughly what I can do in a day. If I'm narrating an audiobook, I will allot this amount of time for narrating today. I will allot this amount of time for editing what I narrated tomorrow, things like that. And then you know what your week is like and you won't get overwhelmed. And then if a new client comes to you asking if you have time, you can see when you have time or what time you have left. And then if anything comes up throughout the day that you need to throw into a to-do list, like, say, oh, I got to pay for my band's rehearsal space rent, throw that in there and you don't have to think about it or get off track. And it makes sure that everything gets done. You reply to the people, you can make a reminder to reply to the people you need to reply to, new clients, and it makes sure that you're just not overwhelmed. So I'd really, really recommend making a good to do list and keeping it well organized. The next thing I would recommend you have is some sort of long form note taking app. I currently use Microsoft OneNote for all my notes. I used to use Evernote, which was a great app. I prefer the look of it, the feel of it, the use of it in almost every way over OneNote. The issues I have with it are really the hierarchical structure of your notes. In OneNote, you can have notebooks and then sub notebooks and then notes within those sub notebooks. So if I'm working on the audio freelancer as a channel, I can have a notebook for video ideas or website ideas, blog ideas. I can have another notebook for, or I can have another note for where I write down my blog posts or my video notes before I go to record. I can have another section within that notebook of um, all my business things, my passwords, when I need to pay for my website again, things like that. And that really helps me keep everything organized so that I only see the information I need to see. Evernote does not have those subsections. So you have a notebook and you have notes. And really, it's just a philosophical difference. They want you to rely on tags, which do have a place, but it's just not how my brain works. So you could tag every note in a notebook based on what subsection it would be in on OneNote. And then if you need to only see video notes, for instance, for me, you would type in the tag you have for video notes and that would come up. But I like to have everything there visual. That just helps me a lot. But I would really recommend having something to help you keep track of everything you have to do. You can write out your descriptions in it, you can make notes for future ways to improve your freelancing. You can make notes of any tips or tricks you learn about mixing that you want to remember, things like that. It really does help to have one centralized place to keep all this. And then the last thing I want to talk about is how to organize all your files on your computer desktop. The way I do it is I have one folder set up just for freelancing. And then within that folder, I have different folders for every different type of job I do. So I have one for podcast editing, I have one for audiobook narration, I have one for poetry writing. So it just makes sure that every time I get a client, I know exactly where their work will be. And then within those gig folders, I make a separate folder for each job I take on. And I title this with the client's name or username if I'm using something like Fiverr. And then any sort of order number that it has, I also put that in there as well. So Fiverr has order numbers, so I'll put that in there. That way, in the future, if there's any sort of issues that arise and they need a file again, I know where to find it. Maybe sometimes when you're doing audiobook narration and you send them all the chapter files, you accidentally send one in stereo and it should be in mono like the rest. And if they come back to you and say, hey, I didn't pass the ACX verification for my audiobook, you know exactly where all your files are, all your bounces are, and you can easily grab it and give it to them. This is especially useful if you have returning clients. Um, you need to have a way to know which order is which. If you have 6 orders for a client and they come back and say, hey, that one we did 3 or 4 orders ago, I need something from there. You don't want to be digging through every file, finding where the bounce is, where the stems are. You just want to know where it's at. So make sure you keep that organized. And then along with that, I'll just say that hard drive space isn't infinite. You can't keep things forever, especially long form audio files are going to take up a lot of space, or if you have bounces in wave format, takes up a lot of space. It would be nice if you could keep it forever, but you can't. So you eventually do have to find a place where you decide to purge some of your older files. I've been keeping mine for 6 months after I hand over the files to the clients, and that's always been enough time for me to handle any issues that might arise. Any issues that happen usually happen within the first 1 to 3 months after I hand them over, if not quicker. So 6 months gives me plenty of time to know that I'm probably done with this project forever. Um, so the way I go about knowing what to delete or not is to tag every job that I do. So I know I use Mac OS. I don't know if Windows lets you tag things like this, but in Mac OS, if you just right click on any folder, you can set a tag to it. You can use colors or words. Colors will give you a visual dot of that color next to the folder, which might help you if you say, "Oh, I just want to delete all the red folders because that's the oldest color I used." But I just tag it with the month that I worked on the project. And then 6 months later, I can do a quick search for the tag of, say, December, and it'll pop up every folder that I worked on in December that's tagged with that. And I can just highlight them all and drag them to the trash. So it's a really quick way to get rid of what I don't need and free up hard drive space that I will need now. And that goes along with keeping things organized, is just making sure that nothing gets out of hand and too crazy, because that'll just make things harder on you as well, especially when you're trying to juggle your hard drive to make more free space and you don't know what to delete, what you still need, when you worked on this, when you did that. So just know when you worked on everything and delete it when you feel comfortable. It might be 6 months, it might be 8 months later, it might be a year later. It depends on how long you feel comfortable keeping something. And that's really it. That's all I do to keep things organized. It might seem like a lot, and it kind of is, but it just makes sure I don't get overwhelmed. I have a lot of different things that I have going on in my life, like freelancing, doing this channel, working on music, other fun things that I just do in general for my own enjoyment that I want to keep track of. And this just makes sure that nothing falls through the cracks. I found that with me, it's really easy to say, "Oh, I still have to do this," and not write it down. And then 2 days later, I'll be like, "Oh, yeah, never did that." And then it'll just never get done for a week at a time. Whereas this way, if I have that quick idea, I can write it down, get it done later in the day. It's out of the way. Things stay clean in my mind, they stay clean in real life, and everything just works so much better, and I don't get so overwhelmed. So, follow these tips. You can tweak them to work for you, but I would recommend getting started right away so that by the time you really gain some momentum, you already have these systems in place that you don't have to worry about setting up and taking the time to do. And it'll make your work quality better, I think, because you will know how much time to devote to everything. You will never have situations where you don't know what happened to something, and you'll be able to spend more time on whatever you want to do, whether that's freelancing work or, just leisure time. Um, so hopefully you got something good out of this video, and if you want some more tips about freelancing, keep watching my videos. See you again soon.